Hello and welcome to my book review of Console Wars by Blake J. Harris, Sega, Nintendo, and the Battle That Defined a Generation. The book Console Wars is a narrative-based non-fiction book. That's how they described it. There's like no citations in it. So there's nothing in the back with all the footnotes, and there's no footnotes, in it. It's just almost like a regular book, but it's considered non-fiction. It was based on a bunch of interviews the author Harris did. It's about Nintendo versus Sega during the 16-bit era. Basically, the majority of the story is about that. But it does go into talking about the Nintendo Entertainment System and how Nintendo basically reinvigorated the console market in North America, and then it kind of ends with the introduction of 3D consoles like the PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and Nintendo 64. But the focus is mainly on the 16-bit console wars between the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo. The book starts off with the hiring of the executive, the CEO of Sega of America, named Tom Kalinske. He had worked for Mattel before, and he basically is the guy who makes Sega popular in America. He helps bring Sega of America and make them a competitor against Nintendo, with the help of Sonic the Hedgehog, of course, being released shortly after he took over Sega of America. It focuses mostly on Sega, it seems like, but it sounds like the author probably was able to interview more people who worked for Sega than Nintendo. But they do talk about Nintendo, about how they started in the NES, and it sounded like the original Nintendo, like they had a lot of control over their product, which I thought was interesting. And some people accuse them of being a monopoly, but Sega was a little more willing to publish just about anything, but it was an interesting read. So let me read you a couple of things that I thought was interesting, some excerpts from Console Wars by Blake J. Harris. He was referring to Yuji Naka, the creator of Sonic the Hedgehog, who was known for his genius programming skills, legendary perfectionism, and notorious temper. In late 1991, following Sonic's staggeringly successful release in the United States and its less overwhelming but still impressive release in Japan, Naka was discontent. He was fed up with Sega of Japan for a variety of reasons, including his financial compensation, around $30,000, though he did later receive bonuses. His treatment by management, which was giving him a hard time for taking 14 months to complete the game as opposed to the standard 10, and for needing a team of 4 people as opposed to the usual 3. Naka was also bothered by the lack of recognition. This game and the whole Sega versus Nintendo debate never would have existed without him, yet he was hardly ever referenced anywhere for his hard work. It's not like he was asking for his name to be in the title, but Sega of Japan wouldn't even allow his name to appear at the end of the game. It was company policy not to credit anyone from the development teams, partially to instill an all-for-one attitude, but mostly to prevent other companies from knowing who did what, which would allow them the chance to poach programmers. Naka understood the policy, but that didn't make it right. Artists sign paintings, writers get bylines, and a movie director's work is hailed as a film by so-and-so. His desire for credit was less about ego and more about peace of mind. Naka felt so strongly that he found a secret way to credit himself and his team. At the end of Sonic the Hedgehog, there is a seemingly blank screen. In reality, however, it's a black screen with black type on it, revealing the names of those who had built the game. Because it was black on black, no player would be able to read this, nor would Sega even be aware that it existed. But Naka and his team would always know. I thought that was really interesting, because this Yuji Naka guy was the guy who helped create the game Sonic the Hedgehog. They said later on that he wasn't the guy who came up with the character design. Someone else did that. But he came up with the basic gameplay and the idea for the gameplay itself. But it said that he only made $30,000 when he did that, but it said he received bonuses, but it didn't say how much. But I just think it's funny that he helped make a game franchise that is known really well, and he only got $30,000 for it, working, at that time. Hopefully he negotiated his contract and got more later on. And then this is a excerpt from the book talking about PlayStation, because in the book they talk about how this guy named Olaf Olafsson was trying to start up Sony making more video games, basically, and it led to the PlayStation. There was another guy in Japan who was making the console itself, but this guy was just trying to recruit developers for it, basically. And before, Sony had tried to work with Nintendo to make like a disc add-on for the Super Nintendo, but that didn't work out. And then Sony was trying to work with Sega to make a next generation console at the time, which would have been the Saturn, but that fell through. So then Sony decided to make their own console, which became the PlayStation, which became a massive competitor, as we all know. Like Tom Kalinske and Peter Main before him, Olafsson realized that the key to selling hardware lay in the software. But unlike Sega and Nintendo, Sony lacked an arcade pedigree and would struggle greatly to turn out first-party titles. Therefore, the secret to Sony's success would hinge on successfully recruiting third-party developers. This is why Olafsson's overpaying for Psygnosis, which was a developer, had absolutely been worth it. Not only did the acquisition help stabilize Sony's first-party roster, but the tech-savvy studio created an easy-to-use development kit with the intention of enticing developers to favor Sony over Sega, whose kit was said to be extremely complicated, and Nintendo, who was notoriously stingy with providing development tools. That was one way that Olafsson hoped to inspire a lemming-like following towards Sony. The other was Electronic Arts, the same company that way back had hoisted skeptics onto Sega's bandwagon. Olafsson and Jim Wims, Sony Computer Entertainment of America's newly appointed VP of Sales, made a deal with EA CEO Larry Probst. If EA could provide 5 titles in time for the launch, then for the lifetime of the console they would only pay a $2 royalty, as opposed to the standard toll of $10. Another sweetheart deal for Electronic Arts, and this time they didn't even have to reverse engineer a console. And I thought that was interesting, that they only had to pay $2 to Sony for each copy of the games they made, and most people would have to pay $10. So that was a steal. And when it said they didn't have to reverse engineer a console at the end of that, what they had done for the Sega Genesis was EA had reverse engineered the Sega Genesis, and they were going to make games, kind of like illegally, but not. And so then Sega wouldn't get a cut of their game sales, but then Sega made a deal with them, So I just thought those were two interesting passages from the book Console Wars by Blake J. Harris, and I would definitely say it was interesting to read. If you like video games or older video games now, like from this era, the 16-bit era, then I would recommend it, that you should read it, because it's interesting. I would say if you like video games, it's a must-buy, but if you really don't like video games but are just interested in business itself, like, in the business world, then I would say check it out at the library. It's worth a read. Console Wars by Blake J. Harris.